So we actually had to actively get ourselves out of that situation because it was a toxic, damaging relationship. It was destroying me. It was affecting my marriage to my husband, my relationship with my children, my work and my ministry. And we knew that we had to take physical steps to get me out of that relationship because it was extremely damaging. It was only when we were out of it that I realized, oh my God.
You are listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.
Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of Under the Rug. I'm Nalini Tranquim, and wow, today do we have an episode in store for you. We are delving into the topic of forgiveness. And goodness me, this is something that I have had to navigate over the years. And I've got one particular situation in my mind as I intro this podcast today, where I had to choose forgiveness over a long period of time. It didn't happen overnight. And I guess I just want to start there today, is that forgiveness is a process, and sometimes it actually requires our commitment to that process over a long period before we actually start to see breakthrough in that area. So this is a very deep topic that we're getting into today, but I know you're going to love it. So take a nice big deep breath in, and if you're on your walk, turn the volume up. And if you're at home, grab yourself a cup of tea, settle down, and let's get into it.
Absolutely. Let's get into it. And just real quick, the feedback on last episode was, it was really beautiful. And it's been so good being in touch with the audience and with the listeners, just going through different people's conceptions of depression, different people's struggles, but also hopefully different people's ability to rise through that.
Yes.
And we're really excited for our listeners, for people who are impacted by that episode, and we can't wait to get into today's topic. As Nalini has so eloquently put, we're touching on forgiveness. One of the most complicated minefields that we navigate on a daily basis is that of forgiveness. On the surface, it's fairly straightforward. There's a lot of research to back the idea that living a life of forgiveness can reduce stress, improve relationships, aid mental wellness, and lead to numerous health benefits. As a born-again Christian yourself, there's much scripture as well in the Bible that covers the topic of forgiveness, but it isn't always an open and shut case. When do we forgive? Yeah. How do we forgive? Are there ramifications for being too quick to forgive? Is it ever worth forgiving? Should I forgive myself? Are the people around me owed my forgiveness?
Wow.
And what if they're actually not? Am I culpable for the mistakes of those who came before me? And if so, is there anything to fix that? It's our hope today that we can tackle just a few of the many complexities of forgiving and maybe alleviate just a little weight from the shoulders and provide some practical steps that you can take when it comes to forgiving.
Yeah, brilliant.
So to start things off, what is forgiveness?
What is forgiveness? Okay, well, you know me. I always like to go to the dictionary on this. So let's get the professionals to give us the answer to that question. So I've got 3 dictionaries for you today. Cambridge defines forgiveness as to stop blaming or being angry with someone for something that person has done, or not punish them for something. Merriam-Webster says, to cease to feel resentment against an offender, to grant relief from payment of. That's interesting. And thirdly, Oxford describes forgiveness as to stop feeling angry with someone who has done something to harm, annoy, or upset you, to stop feeling angry with yourself.
Interesting. I think then, given those definitions, how do you even know when to forgive?
Yes, when is forgiveness required? That's a really good question. Okay, putting it in the context of relationship, right? Whether it's with husband, wife, kids, colleagues, extended family, people in your community, your neighbors, whatever the scenario is, when someone does something that results in an adverse reaction to yourself, right? So you almost do this pullback where you're thinking to yourself, no, wait a minute, that's not right, or that's not good, or no, I don't appreciate that, or where on earth did that come from? That for me is my immediate sign that, hang on a second, I've got a choice here as to whether I'm going to allow what's just happened to penetrate me and then fester potentially, or whether I'm going to choose in that moment to let it go, to forgive and not allow it to impact me negatively. So that for me, and this is, we're just talking, just general everyday scenarios, okay? Not necessarily something that's more complex, that's deeper. We'll definitely go there. But for me personally, I can feel it in my being when something's happened and it's put me off. It's, I just go, didn't like that, not happy with that. Then I've got a choice to make. Okay, do I allow it now to fester? Or am I going to go, no, hang on, I'm bigger than that. I'm just going to brush that one aside, not let it touch me.
Yeah, because going back to that the Merriam-Webster definition, it said to cease to feel resentment against an offender or
Yes.
to grant relief from payment of, and sometimes it can feel like those around us are almost owing in debt.
Yes, absolutely. And look, I'm even just thinking, in my marriage, for instance, Sandra and I might be in the middle of a conversation and then he could come out with something that for me is actually quite offensive. And for a split second, I can choose then to allow what he's just said to make me spiral in thought. Oh my gosh, is that what he thinks? Where on earth did that come from? I don't function like that. What on earth is he talking about? I can then allow myself to spiral, and then it begins to grow and fester on the inside of me, where I do begin to start resenting him. Now the rest of the evening, I don't want to talk to him now because I'm offended. How dare he say what he said, or, whatever it might be. So yes, it's not allowing that resentment to take root, where you're actually big enough and strong enough in character to go, no, I'm going to let that one go.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let it penetrate.
Do you feel that the majority of situations where forgiveness is required comes from honest miscommunication?
Yes, I absolutely believe that, because let's face it, our loved ones are not out to destroy us or to cause harm. I mean, put yourself in that position, okay? Think of you as a husband or a wife or a mum or an aunt and uncle, okay? So let's just talk in the confines of family for a second. Do you have any kind of outward desire to destroy one of your family members' lives? No, of course not. So more often than not, we pick up offenses on things that are on the fly. It could be just someone's sense of humor that, they just don't know where to stop, right? So you're at Christmas lunch and there's that uncle who takes the jokes to the nth degree, you can then risk getting so offended by what he's saying, riled up by what he's saying, to the point where it can actually be detrimental then to your relationship with this person, right? Whereas if you're strong enough in character to know that, hang on a second, he doesn't mean any ill harm. If I can just brush this off, I can tell you now, it would alleviate an awful lot of family distension, right? And division within the ranks. If we could just be bigger than that situation,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I guess then an expectation we have when someone seeks forgiveness is that there is a change in behavior. What
Yes.
should one do if forgiveness doesn't lead to any changes in behavior of the person that I'm forgiving.
Yes, and this is something that I remember us, my husband and I, teaching our kids when they were really little, that when you say sorry for something, you're basically saying, I acknowledge that what I've done is wrong and I'm not going to do it again, right? So in the upbringing of our children, our little ones were growing up of the understanding that if I'm going to say the words I'm sorry, and then mum and dad are going to say, okay, I forgive you for that, it requires a shift on the little one's, front to bring about change in their actions. Okay, so then, fast forward a couple of weeks, we start to see the resemblances of said issue rear its ugly head again. I would go, hang on a minute, what are we doing here? Didn't we have this conversation a little while ago and you apologized for this and now we're right back there again? Okay, so in that situation, you're able to actually pull it up and catch it before it explodes. But yes, what happens when you're in a situation where it's not necessarily parent to child, but rather adult to adult, okay? Maybe even in your marriage, and your husband does something to hurt you and you bring it up and he apologizes for it and you forgive him for it, but then he does it again. Okay, here's the thing with forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean that you're a doormat. It doesn't mean that you just go along with the repeat offense happening over and over and over again, where you have to continually forgive over and over again, okay? We're going to go deep for a moment. Can we go deep for a moment? In season 1 of Under the Rug, we did a 4-part episode called The Church Behind the Curtain, where I opened up about my experiences working within a church where my pastor, my boss, was extremely verbally and mentally abusive. And that abuse went on for quite a prolonged period of time. And it's really interesting because when I was in the thick of it, I was too broken and too on guard from this man's treatment of me to even consider that I needed to forgive him. All right, that wasn't even something that I was thinking. I was a victim in that situation, and I was under this continual attack of verbal and mental abuse where I had no space to formulate forgiveness or that forgiveness was required. However, I did know that his treatment of me was impacting me so badly that it was affecting me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but also physically. And as that demise progressed over a long period of time, it became apparent to my husband, to my loved ones, that things were not okay and that something needed to change. Now, we knew that change wasn't necessarily going to come from him. Okay, so we actually had to actively get ourselves out of that situation, because it was a toxic, damaging relationship. It was destroying me. It was affecting my marriage to my husband, my relationship with my children, my work and my ministry. And we knew that we had to take physical steps to get me out of that relationship because it was extremely damaging. It was only when we were out of it that I realized, oh my goodness, how that treatment had affected me over the years. I had now built up this resentment towards this man that I now needed to start journeying through the process of forgiveness. Okay, but it came later. So here's the thing with forgiveness. When there's repeat offense, the forgiveness is not for that person that's offending you. The forgiveness is for you. It's for your well-being and for your mental state. But when you're still in the situation where that person continually offends, no matter how many times you sit down and have the conversation with them and say, listen, this is really hurting me. This is really impacting me. This is impacting our relationship. It's not good. Something's got to give. And then that person apologizes or acknowledges that it's an issue and then does it again. Now it's not so much about forgiveness, it's about getting out of and dealing with that toxicity or that repeat behavior, because otherwise nothing's going to change and there's going to be this continual downward spiral. The ramifications of that behavior is not good and it's not healthy for you. So action needs to be taken, and then forgiveness is separate to that. It is a separate step.
Yeah, wonderful. No, fair enough. I guess one other aspect of forgiveness is I think we're often quite quick actually to forgive those around us. It is possible to go into very dark and bitter places, but I think for the most part, people today can be quite forgiving of everyone seemingly but themselves. I think we often speak about ourselves in ways that we would never speak about other people. There's this common issue that you see in dating circles where someone will point out something that's ugly about themselves, and then their significant other or prospect might turn to them and go, "Oh, so you're saying that I've made a poor judgment. You're saying that that's something that shouldn't be considered attractive or shouldn't be considered admirable because I myself happen to like that about you." So how do we actually deal with these personal feelings of guilt and shame, and are we deserving of our own forgiveness?
Yes, I mean, I think immediately back to a time where I needed to forgive myself. And that was, and I talk about it in the Orange Hue. When I moved from Zimbabwe, where I grew up, to London to pursue my career in music and discovered I was pregnant with my boyfriend's baby, I remember going through such horrific guilt and shame for my actions. I mean, I was young. I was an 18-year-old. I wasn't married. My parents were pastors of a church, so this just looks bad on so many different levels. And I remember having to go through this process where I realized the guilt and shame was eating me up so much on the inside that it wasn't just affecting me and my own mental health. It was affecting my relationship with my husband. Well, because we then got married, but it was affecting my relationship with him because I was, why did we put ourselves in that position? We never should have done that, So I was lashing out at him, but I was also angry at me and disappointed at me. But then I noticed that it was beginning to affect my ability to mother my child, who was the fruit of our actions. And I didn't want that. I wanted to be a good mum for my boy. All right. And so I had to go through this journey of, goodness me, I've got to forgive me for my actions, accept that this is my current reality, that this is my world, this is the fruit of my actions, but that it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Okay, there is healing and restoration from past mistakes. But if we can't forgive ourselves from those past mistakes, it just piles up and piles up and piles up and piles up. Then we face new situations where again, we've hurt ourselves and we've let ourselves down, and the pile just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's so funny because I was going for a walk a little while back, and I remember seeing this little old man walking in my direction, and he was hunched and slouched, but he just had anger on his brow. Like, that real just angry stance, and he was all hunched, and he was alone, and I was watching him, and I just remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I don't ever want to get to the point in my life where I've allowed the hurt and the pain from yesterday to build and fester on the inside of me, where it's continually left unresolved to the point where it manifests in me physically, where I become this grumpy old cynical slouch, who doesn't have a good word to say about anyone or anything, and where I actually become a burden to the people in my world, where, I'm not fun to be around anymore. I don't want that. Well, if you don't want that, then you've got to make sure you take care of this, of your heart. Take care of your well-being, take care of your mind. And if there's things that you've allowed to fester over time, it's time to let that go. It's time to let it go, because what is it doing? It's just becoming this weight on your shoulders that you're lugging around that's only going to increase over time.
Yeah, and I guess speaking to that, because you've been mentioning specifically the idea of mistakes as a result of your own actions and forgiving yourself because of that. But one thing that's a lot more complicated, I think, for a lot of people is feeling like they're lugging this weight of guilt and shame, but through more ambiguous concepts like generational trauma or the sins of those who've come before you. Yes. How do you navigate feeling like you've messed up and that you can't be forgiven for actions that you might not have even been around to have committed in the first place? Feeling like the mental afflictions of your parents, yes, the cultural expectations of your family, of your upbringing, just load you with this guilt and this shame that you can't seem to get rid of. How do you navigate that?
Yes. Look, speaking personally, again, going back to the story of being this 18-year-old young love, been messing around with my boyfriend, find myself pregnant. Aside from the fact that my parents were pastors, my dad was ex-Hindu. So culturally, this was a huge letdown, right? And the weightiness of my father's culture added to the pressure of the situation that I found ourselves in. And I had to get to the point where I was not willing to continue carrying the pressure and the expectations of family members, of culture, of religion, because it was only adding to the weight that I was already lumbered with, okay? And those issues that I had to forgive myself for. So here's the thing. You are your own person. And yes, whilst we are framed by our upbringing and our past experiences, our upbringing and our past experiences doesn't have to define our steps going forward, okay? You are your own person where you can make your own judgments, your own call on matters. And it's funny, it's like getting to that stage in your adolescent years where you suddenly realize that your parents aren't perfect. It's a devastating realization. In fact, I've got some loved ones that are navigating that very same realization at the moment, young, early 20s, and realizing that, hang on a second, some of the programming from my parents is just warped. Well, listen, your parents would have done the best that they could have done with the knowledge and the expertise and the resources that they had back then. Okay, I know my husband and I have stuffed up. We've messed up with our kids, and we sometimes have this banter with our sons where we completely got it wrong with them, all right? And we often will say to them, listen, please, please, please. And I remember my dad saying this to me, leave the worst of your upbringing. Leave that at the door. Take the best of your upbringing. All right. So I just want to encourage you, if you're in a situation now where you feel like, oh, well, depression runs in my family. It's hereditary. My grandma had it, my mum had it, and now I'm stuck with it. No, you can choose for yourself whether you're going to go down that line, whether you're going to continue with the family line of depression, or whether you're going to draw a line in the sand and say, no, it stops with me. I'm going to break this in my family. I am not standing for this being my judgment for the rest of my days. You have that power to be able to choose and to be able to determine for yourself what you're willing to carry from before and what you're not.
Wow. Yeah. I think it's interesting actually that you said that you'd felt a sense of empathy for this man who was essentially hunched over as a result of like a manifestation of guilt or shame or any negative
Trauma, yes.
trauma or anything like that. And then you were also mentioning feeling this weight of expectation almost beyond what should be necessary as a result of your pregnancy.
Yes.
Did that pregnancy then almost sort of feel, to an extent, that maybe like a subconscious level, like a physical manifestation of, guilt about culture and about upbringing, and this is a marker of the mistakes that I've made?
Wow. Yes, absolutely. And I think I had to stop myself in my tracks at that point and determine for myself, am I going to live the rest of my mummy life seeing the fruit of my actions as being a negative or a positive in my life? Okay. I had to choose for myself how I was going to navigate. And man, I was at a dangerous crossroads because I could have so easily allowed resentment and that guilt and that shame of our actions to manifest in my relationship with my son for the rest of his childhood days. And that would have adversely impacted the way I treated him. Okay, and I know some people are listening to this and thinking, oh my goodness, the way my mom used to treat me, it's probably because I reminded her so much of my dad, or a situation similarly to me where, it was from an adverse scenario that this was what was born of it, right? And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, that's me. That, my mum treated me with such resentment and just, hated the sight of me, as it were. Okay, but that was, unfortunately, you were dealing with the ramifications of your mum's unforgiveness towards that matter that she had dealt with. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you're now trapped in that same, almost generational unforgiveness towards your mum now for treating you that way. Now you actually hold this responsibility for your future, for your well-being, for your future relationships with your children, that I'm not going to harbor resentment and unforgiveness towards my mum for the way that she treated me.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess before we move on to the next question then, just going back to your pregnancy, that actual road of choosing to forgive yourself, you've mentioned the introducing of your newborn to your parents. Could you run me through how that all went down and how that actually panned out in the whole scope of you being able to find forgiveness in yourself, maybe your parents finding more forgiveness in you, maybe that bringing together, creating that familial unison that might have felt like it was tarnished during that rocky pregnancy season?
Yes, absolutely. So it was 2 years before I was able to my hubby and I were able to take our little one back to Zimbabwe to visit my parents and my hubby's parents for the first time since the little one was born, and of course introduce the little one to the family. And I knew that even on the plane, I remember thinking to myself, now you go back and you celebrate this little one because you've forgiven yourself, you and your hubby have forgiven each other, you've accepted this little one, and you're doing everything that you possibly can to be really good parents to this little one and to give him as best a start at life as you possibly can, regardless of the family's reaction, regardless of their response, whether they forgive us or whether they don't, whether they continue to shame us, for what we did wrong. We are choosing to go into this from the standpoint of positivity and forgiveness. And so as much as we had to forgive ourselves for that experience and for our actions, I had to forgive my parents for the pressures that, I had felt because I had let them down. I had to forgive them for that. All right. But I also knew that they had a choice to forgive me and to accept this little one. And well, I am so pleased to say that they had obviously gone through their own mental journey of how this is going to look and how are we choosing to navigate this. Oh my goodness, the minute we landed at the airport and walked through and I saw my mum and dad for the first time, I mean, they just ran towards us and hugged us. And as soon as they saw our little one, I mean, I could just tell that there was just this total forgiveness, total healing and restoration right there. It was the most beautiful thing. And they have had the most fabulous relationship with both our sons, over the years. And I can honestly say God has restored that relationship fully. And there's been no resentment, no heartache, no pain. And, so when people say, hey, forgiveness is good for your mental health, I tell you what, it absolutely is for your mental health, for relationships. It's liberating, absolutely liberating. And if you want to go through life with that same childlike passion and zeal, for what's ahead in your future, you can't do it without forgiveness. You can't do it without forgiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, wow. I guess that would then naturally lead on to like what should I do once I've been forgiven of my mistakes. At least in your case, I think the birth of a child, there's such an intense curiosity and hope for the future. So it's quite easy to understand then, like, you've got a lot of things you can do. Like, here, I can take my child to school, I can teach them things, yada, yada, yada. But sometimes things are smaller, more nuanced. Sometimes it's between two adults. Sometimes it's between you and family. So more generally speaking, what is it that we should do after we've been forgiven to avoid falling into bad habits, to avoid recidivism, and to ensure that moving forward, we're moving forward as better and stronger people?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important to every now and again look at yourself from the third person and just do a quick evaluation on how you're doing in that particular situation, okay? In that particular scenario. You've come before a loved one and you've apologized and you've said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm going to do my level best not to do this again. And your loved one has forgiven you. It's on you now to turn things around and to not allow that pattern of heartache and pain that you're causing your loved ones to repeat. Okay, so you're going to have to be extremely intentional about changing your actions. So it could be that you set a daily reminder in the morning. Remember not to lash out like you normally do. It could be as simple as that. Maybe your loved ones come to you and gone, listen, you can be really mean sometimes. And when you're angry, you say such hurtful words and it breaks my heart. And so that could be your one thing that you're having to deal with. Well, set a daily reminder. Don't vent. Don't, lash out and say things in anger that's going to hurt your loved one. So that there is this constant reevaluating. Okay, how am I doing? Also then being open and mindful of when you're in the heat of the battle and you can start to see yourself falling back into those repeat patterns, okay, of outbursts of anger. Stop, breathe, deep breath in, even acknowledge, oh my gosh, I'm falling down the rabbit hole again, aren't I? And make light of it where your loved one can then go, yep, yes, you are, unfortunately. And then, okay, turn it around, shift the conversation. Okay, how about we go for a walk? Let's stop that conversation now. Let's just go for a walk, or I'm going to go for a walk and pull myself out of that situation, okay? For my hubby and I, every now and again, we'll say, okay, can we have a signal of some sort? Where I can say to you before it hits, hey, just be careful because we're heading down this route. It could be a nudge under the table if we're in a group setting, whatever it is. Come up with little tricks and, solutions to help you navigate those repeat patterns that your body has been caught up in and has now formed a habit, all right, where you're able to break that cycle. That's very, very important.
With breaking that cycle, is it ever appropriate to involve a third party or an accountability partner or anything like that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially when you've tried and tried again to break that cycle and it's just not working. And you can see that, listen, this is going to destroy our relationship if I don't do something about it now. Yes, absolutely. Get a third person to get involved. It could be a psychologist, a counselor. It could even be a pastor or someone who heads up pastoral care. If you're at college, it could be your chaplain or your head of wellness, all right, where you've got this mediator present. Because when you're sitting in a room of somebody else present, you're not going to react the way you normally do. You got manners on this time round, okay? And sometimes we need to get our manners on, even with our loved ones, to be able to resolve situations. So yes, I absolutely recommend getting somebody else involved if it's just not working.
What happens then, I guess, as a byproduct of all of this, when we do live lives of thoughtful forgiveness?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's such a good one. So I'm gonna use that story that I shared with you. And for those of you who have listened to season 1 and listened to the church behind the curtain and want a bit of a follow-through story, I have to say this. It's been many years of choosing forgiveness in my heart, even though I'm in a completely different country to the perpetrator. I've had to consciously make that effort, a choiced decision in my mind's eye to forgive. Okay. Well, I had the experience this year of being in the same room of as my perpetrator from years ago, and I was a little nervous, I'll admit, to facing him again after all these years. But I decided I'm going to use this as a measure of just how much I have actually forgiven him. Is there still a bit of a niggle, of resentment within me, or have I truly let him go? And it was so crazy because I remember when I saw him for the first time, oh my goodness, I felt this overwhelming sense of love and compassion and empathy for this man. It was honestly, I don't even know how that even happened. I ran up to this guy and gave him the biggest cuddle. I couldn't even believe what I was doing. If I were to just pull myself out of that scene for a moment, I would have been looking at myself going, what on earth are you doing right now? But can I just say, there wasn't a shred of resentment or hurt or pain. I just loved him. And can I just say this? The benefits of living a life of forgiveness is you live free and you live without carrying that baggage and that weight of resentment. And it allows you to still find joy in the little things, okay? In the sunrise, in the sunset, in the butterflies, in the flowers, in the beauty of God's creation. It allows you to find joy in your marriage of 25 years. I mean, hello, how did that just happen? And I love my husband with all my heart. Boy, have we been at divorce doors, But it demanded that the two of us choose forgiveness. We choose restoration. We choose healing. We choose our vows. And 25 years later, I mean, my goodness, our boys have finally moved out of home and I feel like we're in our honeymoon phase. It's just liberating. So yes, forgiveness honestly leads to such freedom.
Wow, that's fantastic. I think everything that you said there, it bears repeating that this is something that's been observed in the research and the literature surrounding forgiveness. We had one interesting little story excerpt about one Everett Worthington, a PhD who's been studying forgiveness for nearly a decade, when he was faced with the worst possible opportunity to put his research to the test. His mother was murdered in a home invasion. Could you give me a little a little bit of a run through on that story.
My goodness, it's actually crazy what he says. I'll just pull it up because it says here, I had applied the forgiveness model many times because, of course, he'd been researching it for so many years, but never to such a big extent, said Worthington, who's a professor of psychology at Virginia Commonwealth University. And it's funny, his closing words were, "As it turned out, I was able to forgive the young man quite quickly." Oh my goodness. I mean, that in itself, I mean, I know we had a little chuckle earlier because we were like, oh, I wonder if that's because he had a really bad relationship with his mother. No, that's terrible. I shouldn't have said that. But no, to be honest with you, that horrific event for him could have absolutely destroyed his life. It could have absolutely destroyed him. Because if he had chosen to allow resentment to take root for this man's actions, it would have rippled into his future relationships with his loved ones, his existing relationships with his loved ones, potentially even his work, on the topic of forgiveness. The ramifications of him harboring unforgiveness towards that evil man could have been horrific. But the fact that he chose forgiveness, my goodness, means that he is now able to go forward in his studies and expertise, having lived it for himself, and to be able to profess the benefits himself because he's been there. I mean, who better, right? Who better to testify to the power of forgiveness than someone who's had to walk through that journey of forgiveness for themselves, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. And like in closing, the American Psychological Association have said, whether you've suffered a minor slight or a major grievance, learning to forgive those who hurt you can significantly improve both psychological well-being and physical health.
Yes.
For our listeners, is there any funnels that they should be going down as it pertains to this forgiveness topic? Are there any programs that you've got on offer, any books that they should be looking into?
Yes, absolutely. Well, look, if anybody wants to talk with me further on this topic, maybe something's resonated with you today, or you've got a niggling question or whatever it might be, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me. info@nalinitranquim.com. Drop a comment in the field below, join the conversation, share with us your journey of forgiveness or your experiences of unforgiveness and how that's been affecting you. But for all the girls that are listening, all the women out there who are listening to this, I've actually developed an online coaching program, an empowerment program for women that actually walks you through an exercise of forgiveness that will give you practical steps. So you'll sit down, you'll have a journal in front of you, and I'll go through practical steps with you where you just pause the video, and it takes you through these steps of choosing forgiveness. It is so powerful. And I know for me personally, choosing forgiveness for my perpetrator was key to unlocking me being able to sit here today and continue to do what I do. Because unfortunately, the ramifications of the abuse that I had experienced had left me questioning my own identity. I had no idea who I was. I was so broken and disgruntled from the effects of this man's abuse that I'd stopped playing my piano. I'd stopped writing songs. I could not coach. I just was not in that space. And going through that process of forgiving, honestly, I can tell you now, has unlocked my ability to be able to still fulfill what's actually on the inside of me and to heal and to recover from that. So if that's you, then I really want to encourage you to sign up to my coaching program. We'll make sure that the link is in the description field, okay? So you can just hit that link, sign up with an email address. You don't have to pay for anything. The resource is completely free. It'll give you a taster of the full program, and then you can decide for yourself whether you want to sign up for the actual course. But that's really it today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it has been invaluable to you. I love you, and I cannot wait for the next episode. I'll talk to you soon.
To learn more about Nalini's online coaching programs, visit nalinitranquim.com/store. Thank you for listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.